Alrighty guys, welcome back. This is module number 3. We're going to be doing part 2, going over for loops and list comprehension. For loops and list comprehension are an incredible Python tool that we can utilize and put into our belt now that we're moving along in our Python journey. The ability to write a for loop is something that took me a long time to figure out. Honestly, when I first learned JavaScript, it took me probably 2 to 3 months to purely understand how to write a for loop. But today I hope to be able to break this down and condense it into a simple form so you guys can understand the for loop. And if you've ever had to write code before, or you've ever tried to learn programming, you've probably struggled with the for loop. And if not, you are a superstar, which you guys are all will be superstars one day. But the for loop gives people some trouble. And we'll be doing list comprehension, which is another loop method in a way. We'll get into that too. But let's just jump into the workbook and let's get started for today. So we are now in module number 3, part 2, for loop and list comprehension, and we're going to be going over this in our loops and conditionals module. So the agenda for today: for loops, list comprehension, applications to these concepts in real life, and how we can utilize these to write code. And it's going to be about 20-25 minutes long. I included a meme as always. Me, my friend, copying and pasting the same line of code, a for loop. So that's how we're able to get past some of the redundant code that we might have in our Python notebooks, and you'll utilize this pretty much on an everyday basis if you decide to continue down the road of Python. So today we're going to be hands-on. Windows as always, working in Jupyter Notebook. Again, if you want to reach me, this is my email, matthewngUye2023@fau.edu. So what is a for loop? A for loop is a control flow statement that allows us to iterate over a sequence, a list, tuple, dictionary, string, or range. In this case, we are looking at the for loop as a tool for us to be able to iterate over a specific amount of iterations. And it's pretty simple. So it's just saying for variable in iterable. So we're able to take a variable or a word or a string, and we're able to iterate over that by utilizing that syntax. It'll make a little bit more sense when we actually look at some code. Again, this is a visualization of the for loop. So as we go in for each item in the sequence, we go down to check if it's in the last element. We run the for loop body, and we go back, and we keep doing this over and over and over again until we reach that last element. So for loops are typically predefined in terms of the length. You're able to know at what point the for loop will end and what you're going to be changing. So unlike the while loop, it's not based on a condition. It's just based on a specific length of, let's say, a list, or let's say a dictionary or a tuple, and so forth. So this is the syntax for the for loop. So we're going to say for num in this list here. And now num is just going to be the variable or the iteration. So we're saying for each num in this list, we're going to print num. So you start with the for keyword, and then you state what you're iterating in. In this case, it's going to be a list, but it could be pretty much anything in Python, any mutable element in Python. But it's good practice to use something that makes sense. So we can write whatever we want here, but we want to make sure that it makes sense to the code that we're writing. So for num in this list of numbers makes sense. And then we'll use the in keyword again to loop into this list. And now let's say this list was saved as a variable. We can do that as well. And after this, we'll have what we're iterating in again. So it's this list. So for each iteration, in this case, it's the number in the list. We are printing the number, whichever is the element that we're looking to iterate over. Again, you'll notice this when we start writing some code ourselves. So we can also iterate over strings. In this case, we're doing for character in hello. So we're printing each character. In this case, we'll print HELLO. Because this is a defined length, we're going to be going through each character in this specific string, just like we would in a list, except we're going to be going character by character in this string versus element by element in a list. The hello is a string we're iterating over. So again, each iteration or each time we go through that loop, we're going to be printing out each character. And again, in this case, we're going to be printing H2O. So HELLO. Alrighty, so are you lost? The fun fact, again, it took me a while to learn for loops, and Python syntax is very clean. So you're able to actually look into how these things run. Something like JavaScript might be looking like symbols everywhere. Just trust that you know that in Python you have the pretty basic syntax for doing this. But let's jump into the workbook and let's take a look at some examples.
Alrighty guys, we are back in the Jupyter Notebook. So let's get into it. So the first for loop we're gonna look at is the one from the actual PowerPoint. Again, we're gonna be utilizing the for keyword. We're saying for num in this list. We're gonna print num. So if we wanna actually make this into a variable, let's cut this out and let's say numbers equals that list for num in numbers. So we're referencing that variable. Let's run it again. We'll get the same thing. Now we can do for num in numbers. Let's do print num plus 1. Let's run this. So we'll get 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what it's doing in this loop is just adding the number 1 to the specific list element. So as you guys can see, it's not super difficult. It gets more complicated when we're going to be utilizing things like nested for loops. But in this case, it's pretty simple, and you can just build on the fundamentals to get you what you need. So in this case, we want to print the characters in the string hello. And let's run this. So as shown in the PowerPoint, we're going to be getting each specific character printed out on each line. Now we can also make this into a variable. Text equals input. Text. Write a word. So let's run this for character in text. Let's run this. It's going to prompt us to write a word. So I'll write happy. And as you guys can guess it, it's going to print out each letter in that word happy. All right, guys, so let's take a look at a dictionary, how we can loop over a dictionary. So in this case, we can write the same thing. We have the student grades object, our dictionary. So we can say for student in student grades. In this case, we're going to print the student. So it's going to be the key in this case. So we're going to print the student key. So the key will be Alice, Bob, and Charlie. And we're going to say scored. And we're going to have the student grades at the specific student. So on the first iteration, we're going to have Alice in this. So just imagine on the first iteration, instead of this ambiguous value here from the force loop here, we are going to have, it's going to say Alice. So it's going to print out Alice's score, but in order to do it inside of a for loop, you have to reference that specific iterable here, which is student. So we're saying for the student grades dictionary, we are going to get the student in which we're iterating over and print the points. So let's run this. So we're saying Alice scored 85 points, Bob scored 90 points, Charlie scored 92 points. So as you guys can see here, we're able to iterate over pretty much any type of mutable data structure and manipulate that there. So let's take a look at this next block of code. We have nums in this case, which is a list of random variables. I don't know why I named it nums. Let's name this things. We'll change this to things. We'll change this to things. So in this for loop, what we're saying is we're saying for I, which is just the iteration. So for each iteration or for each index in this case, so for I, the index that we're running through in the range, in this case, it's going to be the range of the specific list here. So we're saying the range of the length of things. So we're saying there's going to be 5 iterations because we know that things has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements. So we're getting that length of things. So we're saying the number of iterations in this case is going to be 5, and we're getting that as a range. So let's take a step back. Okay, so we have this. Now let's actually make this into a variable so you guys can see. So let's just say things range equals range length things. So what we're doing here is we're making a specific range in this case for Python to interpret. So print things underscore range. So you'll see we'll get a range of 0 to 5, and that's indicating that we have 5 elements in this specific list. So I'm going to undo everything in this case so you guys can get back to the for loop. So in this case, what we're doing is we are iterating over this specific list, and by doing that, we're getting a range. So we're saying we're going to iterate over it 5 times. So for I in the range of the length of things. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to say we're going to print the value of the iteration that it is. So the value of this iteration things at I will be 10. We're going to include what we just looped over. So we're going to say we're going to loop over this list how many times. It's just going to be the index, which starts at 0, but it's going to be plus 1 because we looped over it 1 time. And we're going to print this number, this is number of the specific index. So you'll see when I print this, and this is just a line separator. So I'll run this code. So basically what we're doing is we're saying the value of this iteration is 10. So on this iteration in the for loop, it's the number 10. We looped 1 time through this specific list, and this is index number 0. So this is an extremely important concept to grasp and understand so that we can understand how the loop actually works. So on the first iteration, we get the number 10 because it's the first element in the list. However, we loop through that list 1 time since it's the first element. And now the index of the list that we are on is 0. So make sure you can understand this conceptually, especially these second 2 lines. We loop through it 1 time. It's the 0 index because the lists start at the 0 index. On the second one, we loop through it 2 times, and it is the first index because we know that lists start at 0. So on the second iteration, it will be index number 1 and so forth. We'll run this again on a simpler version. So we see that we have an array 1 through 5, and we're saying for I in range, we are printing the length of the array. So for I in the range of this array, we're getting that range again from 0 to 5, and we're printing the iteration number in this case. So we're saying on the first iteration, it's going to be 0, since we're getting the 0 index here, and the value is going to be 1, and so forth. So that might sound like a lot of mumbo jumbo, but let's take this into perspective and let's actually look at a problem here. So let's compute the cumulative sum of numbers based on this list using a for loop.
So in this case, we have a list of numbers. So let's just copy this list into our code block here. Copy this, and let's name this numbers. So it's just going to be a list of numbers. So we want to get the cumulative sum of numbers based on the list using a for loop. So we're going to have a total here. So our total is going to be initiated at 0. So we can say for numbers, or for number in numbers, colon. So we can print the number we are on, and we'll print the number, which will just be the iteration that we're on. So in this case, if we go through it once, we're going to be printing 10. So let's just run this. So we're on number 10, we are number 20, we are number 30, etc. So let's restart this so we can finish the question. Let's also add an operator here by adding to the total. So we're going to say the total, which is going to start at 0, is now going to be equal to the number that we're iterating over. So on the first iteration, we'll start at 10, and now the total is 0. But we're going to be adding that number to the total. So now when this for loop is over, the total is going to be 10. And we can print this by saying cumulative total is equal to the total. So as you guys will see, we'll get the cumulative total as we go through. So if we run this on the first iteration, we start at 10 and the cumulative total is going to be 10. The next number is 20. So as it goes through, it's printing the number that we're on, which is 20. And now the cumulative total will be 30. And the way that this works is that we're going to start here. It's going to start at 0, but since we add 10, it's going to loop again. And now it's going to be, the total will now be 10. So as we go through, total will be 10. We're adding the 20. That'll be 30. We go through it again. The total will now be 30. And now we're going to add 30. So the total will be 60. Now we run this again. The total is 60. We're going to add 40 in this case because that's the fourth iteration with the index of 3. So we're going to have 100 here. And then as we go again, we're going to add that 50 to that total, which is now 100, and we're going to get 150. And the loop will end. All right, so let's take a look at the break and the continue clauses or keywords inside of Python in a for loop. So let's take the numbers here. Let's just take this list over here. We'll paste this in here. So we'll say for num in numbers. And let's say if, as we did the if statements, if num is equal to 40, we will break the loop. And if we don't break the loop, then we want to have it print the number that we are on. So let me make sure I add one of these. Let's run this. So as you can see, we get 10, 20, 30. So it's going through the loop. So we're saying for number in number, it's going to go through 10. Is 10 equal to 40? Nope. So it's just going to print the number. Go back again. Is 20 equal to 40? Nope. It's going to print the number. Is 30 equal to 40? Nope. It's going to print the number. Now 40 is equal to 40. So it's going to break the loop. Now let's use the continue keyword and let's run this. So basically what it's going to do, it's going to do the same thing in this case. Instead of breaking the loop though, it's going to pass through. So if we're saying if the number is equal to 40, we're just going to continue. We're not going to run through any of the code block here. And that's the way you can use the continue and the break keywords in Python. Alrighty guys, let's hop back into the PowerPoint and look at list comprehensions. So what is a list comprehension? A list comprehension is a concise way to create lists in Python. It's utilized by allowing yourself to make a new list based on a prior list of numbers or elements. So in this case, if you look at this example here, we are taking whatever number in this range to the power of 2. So we're saying on 0, 0 to the power of 2 is 0. 1 to the power of 2 is 1. 2 to the power of 2 is 4. And it'll output another list. So in this case, we're using a range from 0 to 5. But it's going to make another list outside of this that is what we call list comprehension. So the syntax for this is just the new list as a variable, and then we write the expression for each item in the old list. So let's say we have this list of numbers. So in this list of numbers, what we want to do, again, is take the square or take the exponent to 2. So in the list of numbers, we have numbers here, and we're going to have another variable called squares. So we're going to say squares is equal to brackets, the number in the list of numbers to the power of 2, and we're going to say for each number in numbers. So what we're doing here is we are creating a variable called squares. So in the variable that we're calling squares is going to be a new list since we are doing list comprehension. Numbers to the power of 2 is just stating that that is what we're going to be doing to the specific list that we have, which is the list of numbers. So we're able to take the exponent of each number in this list, almost like a for loop. So we're going through that specific list, and we're saying for each number, we are doing a exponent to 2. And then the for number in numbers should be familiar. That is the syntax for a for loop. So basically, we're just multiplying the number for each number in this numbers list. We're doing the exponent to 2, and we're doing that for number in numbers. And we'll print the squares, and we get this as a list. So it seems kind of confusing, but I'll show you a couple examples on how we can do it in a for loop and how we can do it in list comprehension. So as you guys can see, this list comprehension that we just did in our PowerPoint, we can get this output. Now let me show you how we can do this in a for loop so you guys can visualize this a little bit better and see why list comprehensions could actually help you. So let's say we want to do this instead of a list comprehension, we do it in a for loop. Let's just declare the list of numbers. So we'll do numbers, and we'll say the variable that we want is squares. That's going to be equal to an empty list. what we'll do here is we'll do for number in numbers, for loops that we just went over. We'll do squares dot append. Remember, we can do that method on lists, and we're going to be doing number to the power of 2. So let's print the squares variable and see what we get. Cool. So we got essentially the same output, except I put a 0 in here. So let's run this again. So we got the same output as a list comprehension, but as you can see, the list comprehension is a little bit cleaner and a little shorter. So if you have simple lists that you want to create based on specific operations, you can use list comprehensions rather than using the for loop, but it's really your choice. I'm going to delete this out, and let's go on to the next list comprehension. So in this case, we have numbers, and we want to computate the even squares. So we only want to square the number if it is an even number. So again, we can take the syntax from here. So we're saying number exponent 2 for number in numbers, except now we add an if statement here. So we're saying if the number modulus 2 is equal to 0, which this if statement is essentially just making sure that the number is even or odd. And if we print this, we will get 4 and 16 because we know we have 2 even numbers in this list. Now, if we wanted to do this in a for loop, let's add above. So we can say numbers, again, is equal to this list. And we can say even squares is equal to an empty list. So we can say for number in numbers, we can put the colon here. We are going to say if number modulus 2 is equal to 0 with 2 equal signs, remember. Then we're going to be doing even squares dot append number. And if not, we're going to skip out of that loop. So let's print even squares, and let's run it. And we get, oops, forgot to add the exponent here, so we'll run this, and we get 4 and 16. So 2 different ways to create lists. You can use the for loop, or you can use list comprehension, and that's pretty much it. Alrighty, guys, let's do one exercise before we close out for today. So we're given this problem. We're saying create a new list that contains only numbers that are even from the original list using list comprehension, and this is the list. So again, you can use a for loop, but let's practice our list comprehension. So let's copy this list here. So we'll say list, or we'll say num. Let's just do numbers. It's one of the things I struggle with sometimes is variable naming. So we'll say, with our list comprehension, we'll say even numbers. So we'll say even numbers, and we'll say num for num in numbers. In this case, we are adding the number for the number in numbers if the number, or num, is modulus 2 equal to 0. So let's close this out. Let's print our even numbers. Let's run this code, and we get the even numbers. So if you want to take a look at this list comprehension, what we're doing is we're adding the number for the number in numbers. So we're saying that we're going to add each number as a part of the numbers list, as long as the num, or the number, is modulus 2 equal to 0. So we're saying as long as the number has a modulus 2 equal to 0, or if divided by 2 is equal to 0, then we get the specific number that we want, saying that it's even. So let's say we want to get odd numbers. When we get odd numbers, all we got to do is say that it's not equal to 0. Let's run this, and we'll get our odd numbers. So basically, it's inserting the number from the numbers array as long as this condition is true, and creating a new list called odd numbers. Alrighty, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. There's a lot to unpack here. So feel free to go through this specific video a couple times, go through the practice exercises, and always feel free to email me if you have any questions. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Take care and stay Pythoning.